Hello and welcome to day 2 of EWA's 2021 National Seminar. I'm Executive Director Caroline Hendrie, and I'm delighted you've joined us. This year marks the second time that our community is gathering virtually instead of in person for the National Seminar. When we meet this way, one special thing we miss is raising a toast together to the finalists and winners in the National Awards for Education Reporting. But we are hearing from some of those inspiring journalists during our shop talks, as well as our How I Did the Story sessions with other finalists and winners. I hope you're joining us for the video announcements of the top 3 prizes at noon each day. Yesterday, we announced that Bianca Vasquez-Tones of the Boston Globe won the Moskowitz Prize for Outstanding Beat Reporting. And a few moments ago, we announced that the Education Week duo of Elizabeth Rich and Brooke Seiss won this year's Eddie Prize from the EGF Accelerator. I hope you'll go to our website and check out these and all the other exemplary stories honored in this year's awards competition. And make sure to join us tomorrow at noon Eastern for announcement of the grand prize. So many of the stories honored in this year's awards chronicle the extraordinary impact the pandemic has had on our nation's schools, educators, students, and families. As we look to the dawn of the post-pandemic era, it's important to reflect on what we've learned and what comes next. Lucky for us, we have a superb lineup of speakers to help make sense of the moment. To introduce them and moderate the conversation, I'm delighted to hand the mic to Erika Green. A member of EWA's Board of Directors, Erika is a correspondent in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times, who covers the U.S. Department of Education and federal education policy with a focus on equity. Erika, over to you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you so much for joining us today. For all of my ed reporters out there, I hope you're hanging in there. And I hope this panel is extremely helpful as we start to document the next frontier, which we hope is soon. So I'm Erika Green of the New York Times. I'll be moderating this conversation titled, "What Pandemic-Driven Changes in Education Will Last and Why?" Before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. First, the session is being recorded. Everything that is said here is on the record. Chats are also on the record. If you hover over the speaker screen, you should see a button for closed captioning and live transcript. To start viewing closed captioning, click closed caption. To view the live transcript, click live transcript and then select show subtitle. To submit a question for our speakers, use the chat box located in the Pathable platform. You can submit questions at any point and an EWA staffer will monitor them and facilitate the Q&A portion of the session. If you're going to tweet about the conversation today, please use hashtag EWA21. And now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our lineup today. First, we have Dan Domenech, Executive Director of AASA, the School Superintendents Association. You would think, given how many times I've written that over the years, I'd have it down pat. Joshua Kim, Director of Online Programs and Strategy at Dartmouth College. Robin Lake, Director of the Center on Reinventing Public Education. And Robert Vela, President of San Antonio College. And I am just going to jump right in. We have a question that I wanted to pose to all of the panelists today to ground the conversation. And that question is, tell us about a pivotal moment in the pandemic when you saw, heard, or experienced something that made you realize education would never fully return to normal and never be the same again. If you could be specific in what happened and what did it say to you? And we're going to start with Robin.
Oh gosh, thank you. Hi everybody, and thanks Erika and EWA. Well, what moment? I mean, I'm not sure there has been one particular moment, but if I had to pick one that was the launch for me, I would say it was March 2020. And, I can't pretend to be prescient, maybe just observant, because I was in Seattle and I was watching as the resistance to closing schools was really hunkering down, watching as districts were really struggling to figure out how to pivot quickly. And meanwhile, while that was going on, I was watching this space where parents were jumping in and starting to solve problems and co-produce education for their kids. I was watching the online teacher forums where international teachers, I mean, really across countries, were just starting to jump online and figure out solutions for what to do. Community-based organizations that were immediately responding to their community needs in a variety of different ways, but places like Oakland Reach that were saying, okay, we don't want just continuity of learning in this moment, we want to accelerate learning. And then over time, I think, watching the space of school districts and CMOs who were starting to say, well, wait a minute, why not? Why couldn't we do something differently? Why couldn't we think about using talent in really, really different ways? And more recently this fall, school districts, according to a RAND survey that we worked on, 1 out of 5 saying they want to hold fast to virtual learning solutions. And so, like this has been a slow evolution over time, but I think it was, to your question, Erica, pretty evident early on that we were about to see something really interesting happen.
Robert, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I think for me, and at a large urban community college in San Antonio, the realization that for the first time, we were all in this together, faculty, staff, students, community, that hit us like a ton of bricks. That for the first time, we kept saying, hey, we know what you're going through. We've been there. We've been college students before. This was different. We were all in the same environment. We were scared. We didn't know what to do. We knew we had to pivot for our students. But I tell you, some of the learning that took place for us was we are pretty nimble to pivot over 2,500 sections from face-to-face to online or remote over spring break was pretty impressive for an institution like this for us. It's very traditional, 95 years old. We did pivot, and I'm proud to say that we had some of the highest retention rates in that semester that we've ever seen before, simply because we were all in this together, simply because we knew it was going to take a phone call, a personal call to each one of those students to say, hey, we're not sure we're doing this perfectly, but if you just kind of hang on with us and hold our hand, we're going to walk the finish line. We're going to see this semester through at the end of the semester. So it took that personal touch, and specifically what we saw, in which I think we'll never be able to go back, is learn from some of the things that we've seen over time. Part of that was the level of engagement our students are demonstrating in this virtual world that we've never seen before. Why? Because we expected students to come in physically to come see their advisor, or physically to come see their faculty member. We doubled our levels of engagement in advising and counseling and academic support simply by providing platforms and availability for our students to connect with our institution. Think about it as a lifeline that's at the tip of your fingertips to connect via your telephone or your laptop. That was transformational. That's when we knew we can't go back to a pre-COVID normal. This will be a new normal for us moving forward.
So much. Dan?
So I go back like Robin to last March. As soon as the pandemic hit and schools began to close, and we gathered our superintendents then, we created our COVID task force to begin to deal with the issues. What became just very apparent and glaring was an issue that we have been advocating for years, and that is the inequity that exists in our school systems. And so when I began to hear from superintendents in school districts that were affluent and had the computers and the teachers were trained and every child had a laptop to be able to take home, and they had to make the switch from in-person learning to online learning, they were doing it. They had been doing it, not full time, but these kids were already used to doing programs and taking courses online. The teachers were trained, et cetera. Then I'm beginning to hear from other superintendents who are saying, Dan, my kids don't have laptops. Most of the homes where my kids come from don't even have internet access. What are we going to do? I mean, our teachers are now writing out lesson plans and putting together packets and trying to deliver it to the homes of these kids so that they have something. And it was just glaring because we've always known the difference that exists in our country between the haves and the have-nots. School districts that spend 3 to 4 times more per pupil than others that don't. And yet we have this incredible expectation of all kids, regardless of where they live and the district that they go to, that they're all going to perform at the same level. And so we have seen this throughout this whole year. And even today, it's over a year now, even today, there are still these children that are still lacking the technology. There are still the homes that don't have the internet access. And that inequity persists. And when we talk about, we don't like to refer to it as learning loss. We'd rather refer to it as accelerated learning. But the reality is that the gap has grown. That so-called achievement gap we've been pursuing for years is even getting wider. So it was a major issue in some way. I guess if you look at the silver lining, hey, look, we've been saying this for years. The inequity exists. What are we going to do about it? Well, now it's glaring. Everybody's aware of it. And now hopefully something will be done about it. And we certainly appreciate the rounds of funding that are coming to school districts to help with that. But what's going to happen after the money runs out?
We'll talk about that later. And Mr. Kim.
Yeah, it's a real honor to be here. It's a real honor to be with all the education writers. You guys have superpowers, which we're jealous of. So it's great to be with you. To build on what everyone else has said, I don't think coming out of COVID that we will ever think of our students in the same way. And I don't think we'll think of teaching and learning in the same way. And part of that is I started to realize that as we started to have classes and other discussions with our students, and we were coming into their worlds, we were seeing each other on Zoom, and we were very much understanding the challenges that so many of our students have to navigate to succeed. And what we've learned in the past year is the most important thing we can do as educators is to build these relationships with these learners, with them as whole people, that together we construct this knowledge. And that's really our jobs. So we achieved a kind of intimacy and collaboration that I don't think we had. I think the inequalities, the structural inequalities we have in education get smoothed over when everyone comes to campus, and were very apparent and exacerbated during COVID. And we all worked as institutions to try to bridge those gaps. And I don't think there's any going back now. We're going to have to keep that mode of pedagogy of caring for our students as we go forward.
Great. Yeah, thank you all so much. You set the conversation up really nicely. I mean, the goal of this conversation is to help reporters and our other members really try to figure out kind of what have we learned, what's going to stick, what's going to be next, and what is actually sustainable. So thank you all for shedding light on what you've seen on the ground. I think naturally, I want to know, I loved hearing about all of you say that in some ways we cannot go back, and you've learned a lot about your students, your institutions, flexibility, but what are going to be some of the most significant barriers to sustaining some of of the positive silver linings that we've had from the pandemic that, you know, existed before, because you can't help but wonder, we've seen school districts, we've seen colleges adapt really, really quickly, you know, governed usually by regulations and rules and desires and politics. And everyone just kind of figured it out. So it makes you wonder, what were we doing before? And will some of those structural barriers that exist to flexibility return after the pandemic is hopefully over. So what do you see as some of the most significant barriers to some of these positive developments that we've seen? Anyone can jump in. I'll go to Robin.
Well, you know, we've been spending a lot of time talking to families and community organizations that have created pods and learning hubs, you know, sometimes in a very supplementary, complementary way to the virtual program that's being offered by the district, but sometimes really off the grid. You know, they've just started it from scratch and done it all. And what all of them say is, you know, not everybody wants to retain those kinds of opportunities, but those that do, and there are many of them, would either like to have the money to, you know, just the funds to continue doing that work, which is a really difficult thing to do given how the federal funds are designed to go mainly to districts. And so, you know, there's a lot of conversation about working in partnership with districts, maybe partnering with states that want to do some experimentation around these kinds of models. But, you know, if the money doesn't follow the innovators, then we have a real problem. So if I had to pick one thing, it's flexible funding to support more individualized, relationship-based innovations, those that are trying to figure out ways to leverage community assets to create new pathways to career and college. You know, there's a lot of potential there, but if we hold the money tight, if we don't let it move flexibly from course to course, that kind of thing, then we're stuck in what we've always had.
Dan, I have to hear what you what you think about that. I mean, your superintendents are obviously going to have a challenge in the next few months to make sure that they get their kids back, that they, you know, have as many resources at their disposal as possible within the school systems. What do you think will be some of the challenges that you face to sustain some of what we've seen?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges, and we're talking quite a bit with our superintendents about this, our biggest challenge is going to be to not want to go back to the way it used to be, to lose the opportunity that this pandemic has brought about in terms of making people aware of the changes that need to take place in education and moving forward towards making those changes. What happened to the school calendar when, you know, we're seeing school districts that are now just beginning to bring kids to school in person this spring? Those kids have been out all year. What's going to happen to the Carnegie units at the high school level that requires kids to be in their seats for so many hours in order to get credit for a course? There are so many things that we do in education that this provides an opportunity to bring about change. The immediate impulse is, whoa, what are we going to do about the learning loss as it's taking place? We have to make use of summer. We have to make use of vacation time. We have to make use of after school. Absolutely. So all of these things are new efforts that are going to require changes in the rules and regulations that govern how schools operate. So it is a wonderful opportunity to take advantage of what has happened and learn from what has happened and begin moving education in a very different direction. And I guess we're going to be talking about this later. There's the issue of sustainability. It's wonderful that we're getting billions of dollars, but those billions of dollars are only going to last up until 23, maybe 24. And so what are the things that can be done now that will sustain without the necessary flow of funds that we're seeing in our schools.
And Dan, do you see a post-pandemic world where superintendents and school districts partner with local community organizations and parent organizations to continue some of the pod learning hubs?
Absolutely.
Brought up?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we're talking about is, you know, I've been in education for 53 years. I'm an old timer. And I remember, you know, being a building administrator where we put up the walls and say the kids are now mine, and everybody else in the community, you can have them when they leave. Okay. Yeah. We can't do that anymore. We now have to open the gates, and we now have to work collaboratively with all of these community organizations, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to achieve what we need to achieve. If we want to talk about catch up, that's the only way that we're going to be able to catch up, by involving all of these community groups, so that education takes place not only in the school, but after school, over the summer months, and all of these organizations become partners in the learning process.
And Robert and Josh, I mean, nowhere is more regulated than higher ed. Having covered it for 4 years. What do you guys see as some of the barriers that may exist, particularly in whether it's federal or state, federal regulations, state funding, that may be, you know, a challenge for you as you seek to continue to build on what you have created during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's back to Dan's point. I mean, you know, right now we have relief stimulus money to help us through this process, right? But what happens when that goes away? And obviously our state is continuing to cut their allocation to support some of the state-sponsored schools. It's important that as higher ed institutions, very traditional in the way we fund our own departments and programs, start to really think about how we're going to fund our schools moving forward, internal locus of control, our own budgets and how we control that. There have been some constructs there that have been there for many years, and we talk about student success. We talk about wanting to achieve success and really address our equity gaps, but our funding streams internally have not followed that because we're still very traditional in the way we fund our own programs and our own departments. It's important that we develop a strategic plan that's aligned with our mission to ensure that the funding also follows those goals and those objectives, right? We've got to be sure that at the end of the day, we're accomplishing student success and we're addressing those equity gaps, right? And part of that is being intentional with your budget, being intentional how you resource those monies, because at the end of the day, we need wraparound service. We need academic support programs. We have students with housing and food insecurity. We have mental health challenges with our students. And in the past, we've said, well, here's a local agency that you can go to. They don't go. Those students will not go. If we don't provide the services there ready for them to be able to take advantage of the resources that we have as a true retention effort to get them through the finish line, we're going to lose those students. Part of that is ensuring they have the technology, they have the Wi-Fi capabilities, all these things that this pandemic has exposed. We need to do a better job and ensure that the funding that we can control internally from the state or from the feds gets directed to truly supporting student success and closing those equity gaps that we have at each of our institutions.
Yeah, and Josh.
Yeah, that's great, Robert. It's great. So, you know, in the context that I'm in, I think the structural pressures and opportunities are more internal than external, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of a privileged place to be in, and I want to acknowledge that. You know, I'd say our challenge is very much continuing the cultural shift that the pandemic helped bring about, which is, you know, to get back to this pedagogy of care that all of us at the institution are invested, and our main priority is helping our students, and particularly our students who have the most challenges. And part of that is listening to them, like actually hearing what are your challenges, what can we do? And the whole institution needs to really be directed at providing the resources, the support, the flexibility for those students who have the biggest difficulties. So that's kind of a mind shift, right? Like there's lots of priorities in higher education. There's research or status, there's money. But if we say, look, our number one priority is caring for our students. And if we care for the students who have the least money, access to technology, most complicated lives, that will serve anyone, kind of a universal design. So I think our challenge is cultural, and I'm very optimistic, but we need to keep talking about it.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what was the mission before if it wasn't student care and well-being?
I think that's always been our mission, but learning has been a priority among many, right? We have a lot of priorities in higher education. And during COVID, a lot of those priorities went away, right? We really got concentrated on, all right, together, we have to get through this together. We're all educators and learners. We're co-constructing a higher education experience, co-constructing our learning. That's our big priority. And initially, we let go of things like grades, right? We were a lot more flexible. We were a lot more willing to kind of go into this and let's just do this as people. Well, we don't want to slide back to how it was done before. There's a lot of history to this about how it's done. We don't want to slide back, but I think the key is listening to our learners, right? Putting them forward, say, what do you need? What's working well? What's not? And let's work together. I think that will be our challenge.
I think, Erica, also to highlight what Josh just said, we, even at a community college, we often heard, these are adults. It's here if they want it. If they don't want it, it's their choice. They're adults. They can make those. We've taken a more in loco parentis role now to ensure that we're highly prescriptive, we're highly intrusive. And Josh is right, is how do you demonstrate care? How do you genuinely care about students, both inside the classroom and outside the classroom? That's been the shift, is taking more of that on, being intentional, being very, I heard Josh say co-construct. We use the term co-create those experiences with heavy student input.
Can you give an example? Can you give me an example, please, Bob?
An example of
being more prescriptive.
Yes. So we have a case management now advising program where every student, and we have 20,000 students. Every student is assigned an advisor and they must meet with that advisor. It's no longer, if I need help with my academic advisor, at some point I'll meet with my advisor. We had students going through our academic journey without even meeting with an advisor. And what happens is that they were transferring 90 hours when they don't need to a senior university and running out of financial aid at the very end, right? So now every move they make, every schedule build is with a counselor. You cannot move forward without having that intentional dialogue with a professional that can help you ensure that you maximize your experience at that college and don't transfer excess hours that could potentially hurt your financial aid on the back end. So that is a case management approach to academic advising to ensure that every class they take counts, it will transfer, and it will apply to that degree program to that senior university.
And that's required.
Required. There is no option anymore.
Got it. For Robin and Dan, I'm also interested in this idea that there's been a lot of emphasis, and I will say as an education reporter for a decade, I feel like a lot of what has been exposed, we've been shouting from the rooftops and writing about for forever. But there seemed to have been a shift also in the K-12 space to really a standard of care for students that we hadn't seen, at least for a few years, or just was not the anchor of the education system. And that's, it's called SEL, social emotional learning, or whatever you want to call it. I call it standard of care. In what ways do you think we will see this accelerate once the pandemic ends and everyone's back in school? Or do you think that that's just a concept and an acronym that's going to go by the wayside again? And that's for Dan. And for Robin, this idea of individualized learning and is also one that's been around for a long time. It's been the source of political fights also, I'll remind everyone. I would love for you to talk about to what extent you think we're going to see either that sustain or not, and what the challenges are for those. So I'm sorry, I know I asked you both questions. You can jump in, Dan.
All right, let me jump in on that one. Again, let me go back to my years as a teacher. When I could take my kids home, because I lived 3 blocks away from the school, I could take kids home with me to have lunch in my house. And I could take kids home with me during lunchtime to shoot hoops in our driveway. And I could take the kids on weekends and do all kinds of things with the kids because they needed it. They had nobody else to do it. Then as we've progressed, we came to this thing called No Child Left Behind. And all of a sudden, every teacher and every school district was going to be held accountable, not for what you did for the kids, but for their academic performance in reading, math, and science. And so all of a sudden, things changed. It was all about the academics. It was all about the scores on these tests and whether you were, producing or not. There wasn't any accountability for whether you were taking care of these kids or not. That was on the side. The main thing was, you got to score. And so we also saw the change in curriculum where all of these other subjects, the arts, the music, everything else became second to the academics, the reading, the math, and these scores, okay? What did that accomplish for us? Okay. Do we still have an achievement gap? We absolutely do. Did we make any difference? No, we haven't. Why? Because we failed to realize that for a lot of these kids that can't learn, they can't learn because they have these social emotional issues that have to be resolved. And unless those issues are resolved, it's not going to happen. If a kid is going to come into my class hungry, he hasn't had breakfast, he hasn't had lunch, you think that kid cares about my math lesson? No way. And if a kid is coming to me from a home that's broken or where they're homeless or they're living with grandparents, all of these issues, unfortunately, have been ignored. And here again, as we saw the inequity with technology, we're beginning to realize again, the fact that all of these kids have not been paid the attention that they need to be paid. I'm delighted to hear Robert and John say that in higher ed, they're taking this emphasis because it's something that certainly K-12, particularly with the younger kids, even elementary and even our middle school and high school kids, they need that kind of support. They need that kind of attention from the teacher. And if that happens, guess what? The academics will follow. The scores will go up and they will be fine. But I'm glad to see that that emphasis is there now. And I hope like hell that is going to continue even after the pandemic is over.
And individualization, which, of course, is very much related, not just to academics, but also social, emotional, mental health needs. How much will things shift? I think there are things that we're starting to see are pretty easily going to shift. I think, I mentioned the stats before about, large numbers of districts are saying they're going to give kids the virtual learning option long term. So more choices and options in terms of how education is delivered. We're seeing a lot of discussion about, closer ties that are kind of relationship-based ties that are technology-enabled. So both student and parents, I think, will have the opportunity to have virtual IEP meetings, virtual parent-teacher conferences, just easier ways to communicate, which has got to enable more individualization, you would think. Just, more participation is good. And more flexibility built into the system around, people are talking about virtual snow days lasting into perpetuity. But, what kind of gets me excited is, could families travel overseas for 6 months and still participate in schooling? Could migrant families make their migrations and still participate and not lose that learning time? So that's all good stuff. I think for me, the kind of the bigger question around individualization comes when you hear students say, what I really loved about virtual learning most of it maybe I hated, but what I really loved about it was being able to move at my own pace, being able to demonstrate mastery in things and not have to sit in a seat for, X number of hours. The individualization that's happening in small learning communities, just knowing kids and seeing, being able to respond to their immediate needs, whatever they are, to address identity formation, racial affirmation is a big thing. Those are dynamics that I think we're going to be very challenged to address because of the way that our systems are set up. It's just, large class sizes, large institutions that are just not built to meet those needs. And that's where we're going to have to challenge ourselves to come in and say, are we committed to really going there and really playing with the margins of what's possible to create more flexible spaces, find creative, affordable ways to build relationship based and knowledge bases about what kids need, and systems and structures, assessment and accountability systems that really go there and to get to the individual need, not just the average.
Yeah, that's a great point. I was talking to my principal and a superintendent recently, and they said it was like a duh moment for them. Like, how did we not do IEP meetings over, virtually? How do we not have parent-teacher conferences? Parents could never make it at 6 p.m. because they were getting off of work. Like, if we had just done it over Zoom, we would have had a lot more engagement. All right, kind of a lightning round. Money. I mean, we have to talk about money. Huge opportunity, huge infusion of cash to both higher ed and K-12. Give me a smart use of federal stimulus dollars and an ill-advised use of federal stimulus dollars as we all prepare for the next phase. Dan.
Okay, so smart use. Certainly, there's urgency in taking matters at hand immediately. So the summer opportunities in terms of providing learning for these youngsters. And by the way, as we talk about the social emotional, well, I see a lot of the superintendents doing is really combining it. Districts that are actually outsourcing with summer camps to provide the kids with a camp experience while at the same time they're learning. Involvement of all of these, the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts of America and the Mount Foundation, after school programs. All of these are opportunities to use these dollars to outsource a lot of these programs during the summer months, after school, et cetera, to take advantage of the additional time, because that's how you accelerate learning, by providing students additional time to learn, particularly the youngsters that require more time in order to learn. So those are the smart things we can do. The ones you have to be careful for is spending a lot of money on things you're not going to be able to sustain, because you're going to reach this cliff when the money stops. And then what do you do? So you have to be careful in terms of what you're doing to be smart. Also, to be smart and use things like per pupil costs in terms of when you do outsource or create new programs, to make sure that you're not overpaying for some of these programs, that you're not paying exorbitant amounts of money because you're being taken advantage of by groups that want to offer these services. So these are the things that you have to be on the lookout for. But clearly, this is a great opportunity to hire tutors, to outsource programs, to use the community, to extend the day, to provide summer programs. These are all things that if we do, and by the way, spread the money over the 3-year period. Don't try to spend it all that 1 year. Create your budget. And you're spending 40% and then 30% and then 20% and then 10% in that final year. So that's what we're working with our school districts and our superintendents to do. And I think many of them are going to do just that. That's going to be the formula.
Do you see much money going towards salaries?
That's an issue. Here again, if
issue.
you do that, how do you sustain it when the money runs out? Mm-hmm. And I know that there are folks that say, well, if we do it now and we pay, and by the way, I'm the first one to say that teachers are underpaid, terribly and horribly underpaid. But the way to do that is not to, with a single shot bill that's going to last 2 or 3 years. let's pay teachers more and let's put it in the formulas, okay, that the federal government and state governments do. Put it in the formula so that that money is there forever, not just for once. But yes, absolutely, teachers are underpaid. We need to do more.
And I'm going to go to Robert. I would love to hear your take on this.
Yeah, no, great.
One K-12, one higher ed.
No, thank you, Erica. Great points, Dan. And it's similar to higher ed. I think for us, the smart use of the funds is to get that immediate resource to students, whether it's monetary, whether it's a specific service around housing or food insecurity or mental health or a crisis. At the end of the day, if a student cannot pay their light bill and you have the resources to help them, chances are they're going to leave your institution simply because they can't manage, right? So we've got to get the smart uses to get the resources and the monetary resources to students that are in dire need and desperate need right now. I think whatever we do, back to Dan's point, has to be transformation. We have to work in the spirit of transformation. For the first time, probably in the history, or maybe there have been other points, we have an opportunity to really co-create a whole different way of how we deliver both instruction inside the classroom and outside the classroom. So the money needs to be an investment in changing some of these structural kind of components, constructs in our colleges and universities that have been there for many years. And you ask somebody, why is that there? They say, well, it's been like that forever. I mean, it's just what we do, right? That has to, we've got to use that. The misuse would be simply if we spend the money on just simply using it as a transactional means. If we're just going to do this and do that and supplement salaries and if it's not intentional about how we sustain it, how we systematize it throughout the college or the university, we are going to be probably worse off at the end of this stimulus package than we were when we first started. So we've got to be able to think smartly and to think about long-term structural changes that really hone in on what matters most. The North Star for us is student success and addressing those equity gaps within student success.
So Josh, I'm sure you will not say that spend it on building more buildings on campus, huh? No. I'm running out of time. I always do this. I'm sorry. We're going to take about 3 more minutes, and I'll start with Robin and Josh. What are some of the most important questions you think reporters should be asking in their local communities about the education recovery period? If you had to say to a reporter, you should go ask X and try to figure out a story on that, what would it be? And Josh, you can start.
Yeah, just to answer the last question, I would give as much money as I could to community colleges. They educate 40% of our students. They are the center of our higher education system. So community colleges across the board. I would love if reporters would come and talk to leaders about universal design for learning. That's another way of this pedagogy of care, that our learning design works for everyone. Now that's becoming leadership priorities to do that. It used to be kind of maybe on the side. So I would ask reporters to hold university leadership to the fire, their feet to the fire, that they're investing in universal design for learning.
What is universal design for learning? Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah, so it's basically a method of course design that works well for all types of learners, whatever their cognitive challenges are, whatever their challenges are with technology or other ways. And it's just a way that we can set the bar so it holds everyone up. It sets the floor so we can hold everyone up.
Wow, I mean, reporters, you all have been doing such an amazing job, and there's endless possibilities. But in terms of kind of looking forward to durable change, sustainable change, change that is oriented around not just catch up, but leapfrog. I think, there are sets of inquiries that are really interesting for reporters. I would probably urge folks to start with, is the district, the folks with the money, the folks with the power, are they going out and doing some listening to start around what families, what students, what teachers are saying they really want to hold on to, want to do differently going forward, to community leaders kind of assessing what kinds of capacities are out there, or are they just marching forward and sort of, layering on to what they've already done? I would want to know, is there a pause and an assessment before money decisions are being made? And then, kind of looking to the budget, are the budgetary decisions kind of going toward things that not only we know work, like tutoring, but are they being used in creative ways? So, special education funding, for example, there's never enough money there. Never, 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 even with this extraordinary influx, and the needs are so amazing. And so follow the money to see, where's their experimentation? Where's their innovation? Are folks thinking about using telehealth instead of hiring more counselors for every school? I hate to be the budget person, but I think that's where you get a lot of clues about whether things will be durable.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Erik, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you all so much for that. I have so many other questions, but I think we can, what I'm hearing is that, there is this itch to get back to normal, but normal was not good enough for so many students in this country. So Erik's going to go to the Q&A portion, and then we'll come back and wrap up. And thank you all so very, very much. It was really enlightening.
Thank you. The first question comes from an editor from the Indian Panorama, a New York-based news weekly for the South Asian community. What is the future of international students coming to the US, especially from badly COVID-hit countries like India and Brazil? Are they going to face any specific challenges? I presume this is more of a higher ed focused question.
Unfortunately, we've seen a drastic decline in our international student body, which is just, it's been very painful because we value our international students and how they contribute and how we co-learn and co-create within the college. Obviously, during past administrations have had a tremendous decrease in some of the enrollment. We've seen some challenges with COVID. We're seeing institutions that need to recoup some of their shortfalls with raising tuition, and obviously international students is one that tends to go up. So we need to be more thoughtful and careful. When you think of college, you think of diversity, you think of learning from different students, different parts of the country. We need to cultivate that experience for our students. If our students are going to compete at a national and global level, we need to provide those experiences for them. So we as college and universities need to do a much better job cultivating these partnerships with the entire world to get more students in exchange programs and those things. I truly value that, but obviously that has not been at the forefront with a lot of the things we're doing right now.
And I would just add that we live in a global market for higher education. Higher education is one of our most important exports for students we bring to this country. So very much, I hope that we take an attitude that we need to not only provide vaccines and for the US, but we really need to invest globally. It's in our interest. We're very tied globally. So I'd say those two hang together.
We have a question from Sarah Garland at the Hechinger Report. It was asked early on, so I know there were some specifics given, but she reiterated the reporters craving more specifics about K-12 or college practices that have been both transformational and that are feasible to keep long-term. I know we heard of even some of the simple things like virtual IEP meetings and virtual parent-teacher conferences. But do any of the speakers want to quickly tick off a few more concrete examples of things that are quite different and that will last?
Well, let me jump in very quickly and say that a lot of our school districts already are talking about allowing virtual learning to continue for parents that request it. And it's amazing that the percentage I've heard as high as 15% in communities where the parents, because the kids have done so well. See, these are the starters, independent learners, kids that have the opportunity to move at their own pace and not felt like they're being held back. So they want to continue with virtual learning, and districts are doing it. They're saying, okay, if that's what you want, we're going to continue. Depending on what state you live, though, and what community you live, there are the laws, that require you to be in school in person in order to get state aid. There are states that are already the governors are beginning to say, no, we're not going to do that because they want all the kids in school in person. But definitely online learning is here to stay. It benefited definitely a particular population of students, but it is something that is going to be available and effective for all kids sooner rather than later.
I'm going to give just one quick one for higher ed. Mandatory tutoring, right? Tutoring traditionally is optional. If it's there, if you need it. What we have done, and we're going to try to take it to scale, but we have identified, we've got about 30 high challenge courses where traditionally students fail out. And we've embedded tutors in those courses. And we have reduced our math. Traditionally, the math classes are the ones that students struggle with. And we've gone from 10 high challenge courses to 1 by simply embedding a tutor, a peer tutor in there and paying them to be in there and to help every one of those students to ensure it needs to be prescriptive, it needs to be intentional, take the word optional out, and things really start to move.
To move on to another question, this is focused more on the higher ed. Can you talk more about changes your schools have made to better meet student mental health needs during COVID and what you see in the future?
We have scaled up our personal counselors. We've hired licensed professional counselors now that are both online and face-to-face. They also take a case management approach. So it's not a one-time you're done and we've inoculated you and you're done and you're finished. It's how do we follow through with the student through graduation, through employment, through the transfer process, right? So it's mental health counselors, social work professionals and interns working a case management type of approach with our students who seek assistance, both online in a remote setting and face-to-face.
And Robert, while you still have the mic, there was a follow-up question about structures in your institution that you would change with the federal stimulus money. Can you give an example or two of that?
Yeah, structures like for us, it would be ensuring that we have daycare. That's one example that we're working on now, that we have daycare available to our students and employees while they're working through these changes, right? Before, it was a very limited number in a very structured way to provide childcare. But we are now taking more of a Boys and Girls Club, YMCA type of approach to increase the likelihood of our parents taking more evening and weekend classes when they can and not having to worry about their children for some, extended period of time. If you bring your family to college, you will take classes at the college, but guess what? We have a structured program for your kiddos here at the college as well. So it's that in local parentis, making sure that we're taking care of the entire student and their needs. It's difficult to be everything to everyone, but you've got to know your students. So I would ask reporters to ask, what is your housing? What percentage of your students are housing insecure? What percentage of your students are food insecure? What percentage of your students are, because those aren't the traditional questions. The traditional questions are, what's your retention rate? What's your matriculation rate? That's common. Let's start digging down in those lines of questioning to be sure that the colleges are doing and truly serving their communities.
For the mental health question, do we want to also address that at the K-12 level of, what kind of shift we might be seeing, and will it be short term to address this moment, or will it be longer lasting?
Robin, you want to take that?
Yeah, I can start. I know that every district we're in touch with is serious about the mental health concerns, is trying to find ways to assess needs through surveys and that kind of thing. Putting in place some systems like allowing kids to have a place where they can kind of virtually raise their hand and have an adult get in touch with them. But I think, you know, the big question for folks is how to have a tight integration between those kinds of supports and the academic needs so that they're not walled off from each other, that it's a really seamless kind of move around what are the barriers that are getting in the way of kids learning. How do we address them quickly and effectively and really not lose our focus on academics? And I think, you know, the smart districts are thinking about partnerships that way, thinking this is important. We can't do it all. There is no way. So we're going to have systems that we build in to get the folks, the professionals, to, you know, build the base relationships, but we're not going to get distracted by trying to serve every kid's need in every way.
And along the same lines, there's a lot of interest. For example, this year we have seen suicide, kids that are actually thinking of committing suicide, the rate the highest it's been in years. Drug abuse, incredible problems in all of our schools. So that there's a real problem here. And again, the classroom teacher is not going to be able to solve those issues. That's when we talk about partnerships, developing partnerships with the health agencies in the community. So social workers, mental care workers, all of these individuals that are trained to deal with these issues can be brought into the schools and be part of this effort, because there's no question that there's a huge need for it. And if these youngsters, these students are not taken care of, the results are going to be calamitous. So that's another area where I think the change from these are the walls of our building, and if you want to take care of the kids, you take care of them after. No, invite them in, identify the youngsters that need that kind of support, and provide that support together.
Hey, just one more thought on that. The other dynamic that I'm hearing a lot from districts is they really want to rethink high school in this moment, because they think that the way they've set up large high schools and the kind of pressures on kids and the way that it's hard to really establish good relationships and not, you know, the inflexibility of big high schools is just, you know, badness designed to cause kids to, you know, to struggle. And so there's a real movement there for rethinking high schools, and that'll be interesting to watch.
Okay, thank you. We had a question about the missing students. Can you talk more about the missing students? The hundreds of thousands of former students who've abandoned higher education, for example. Should there be an effort to get them back, and what should that be? I also want to say that obviously there have been some students in K-12 who also have not been showing up virtually. So I think this could be addressed at both levels.
Well, I'll tell you very quickly that districts are hiring personnel to go to the homes of the students that they have on record that they haven't seen all year, to actually go to the homes and find them and try to bring them back. And they're doing that now, and they will be doing that throughout the summer months.
And we will, part of our advising case management approach is to also take part of that caseload are those students that did stop out or that initially applied that did not come, to continue to follow up and follow through with them. So the caseload is not just for active students, it's for students that have stopped out, and that we continue to try to get them back in, because I know what we see in the past is if we don't get them back in quickly, we probably won't see them back for another 10, 15 years when they're saying, I wish I would have just stuck with it. And what we're telling our students, we have so many resources right now because of these stimulus monies. You're better off with us than without us. Stay with us, even if it's one class, so that you can be direct recipients of a lot of the resources that we have now that we have it. So stay with us, don't stop out.
Okay, we probably have time for just about one more question here. There was a question about districts partnering more closely with learning pods, micro schools, community organizations moving forward. Are there any standout districts that are doing this work now? What does this look like? Robin, I'm guessing you have an answer to that, and Dan, perhaps you do as well.
Yeah, we are in touch with, working really closely actually with 6 districts that are intentionally trying to use learning hubs to experiment with durable change. And so thinking about reinventing high school, or learning pods that focus on racial affirmation and identity, or whatever the community is really demanding, and thinking about not just one, but maybe a system of hub and spokes within the district where there are small spaces that really leverage partnerships and leverage new ideas and relationships. Edgecombe, North Carolina is a really interesting one to watch. Oakland School District is partnering with Oakland Reach, who I mentioned before, to really focus on literacy and parent training, parent advocacy and guides. We have on our website the full list of districts. So those are just a few.
Yeah, and I absolutely. And by the way, the infusion, if it ever does happen, the president's plan to provide pre-K and free community college, you're talking about expanding 4 years, adding 4 years to education. And again, in order to do that, districts are going to have to reach out to these organizations at the pre-K level, organizations that already offer preschool, childcare, et cetera, in order to make that a reality.
Okay, thank you. So Erica, in a minute, I'll give a couple of housekeeping items, but did you want to wrap up, or anything you wanted to say to close things out? No pressure.
Yeah, no, thank you guys. Thank you all so much. To all the attendees, they are a resource for you. I'll definitely be hitting all of them up for stories in the near future, and you should feel free to do so as well. And thanks so much for having me. I hope it was helpful.
Okay, great.
And thanks to all of our panelists.
On behalf of EWA, thank you to our speakers. This was fantastic. And Erica, you as well, thank you so much for taking the time to work on this. I really appreciate it. We all do. So, and just to let everyone know, we've got plenty more coming on the schedule for today. So check out the agenda for the rest of the day. And you also will get an email next week with an evaluation form. Please complete it. We take our member feedback very seriously and use it to improve our programming here. So with that, we will sign off, and later keep an eye out. We're going to have the video available to watch, and even a rough transcript of today's conversation. Thank you.